point where they had so many visitors, the hoteliers and the restaurateurs were finding they were losing business because they were being driven away by the number of cruise passengers. The question is, what is the value of cruise tourism and how do you protect your interests? Well, one is ports have to have a high self-esteem. The bottom line is cruise lines need ports more than ports need cruise lines. And cruise lines depend on ports having a low self-esteem and really taking them at any cost. Ports need to recognize there's no guarantees. You could have 109 cruise ships this year, and they can decide next year, well, we're going to go someplace else. And they'll just move on, and you build an infrastructure, you've got the debt, and they're happy somewhere else. You need to rely on your own research. If you're interested in what passengers spend, do it yourself. You want objective research that isn't done by somebody who has an interest in showing you that there's a certain amount of money being spent. Ideally, there should be cooperation within ports so that ports aren't played off against one another. And to me, it's important that there be public involvement in decision-making so that the people who are dealing with the numbers of cruise passengers and the economic costs are involved in the decisions that affect their lives. Now, I mentioned Key West. Key West got involved in this issue because in the early 2000s, the National Geographic Traveler listed them as getting ugly as a tourist destination. And people began to recognize that they were losing business. As I said, hotels and restaurants were the ones that were pushing this. There were two groups here. There was a group called Livable Old Town, which is a community group, and there was a group called Last Stand, which was a political action committee. These ads were put in the newspapers by Last Stand. And what they were able to do was, through community forums and through activism, is they rolled back from 1 million cruise passengers a year to less than 700,000. They brought it down to a livable level so that cruise tourism could coexist with other forms of tourism. Okay. Monterey, California, they had a different approach. Cruise ships started wanting to come there in 2001, 2002. They said, well, if you want to come here, we want you to sign a pledge. You won't discharge anything in the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, the largest marine sanctuary in the world. So cruise ships signed it. And I was there in 2003, January 2003, did a presentation, and the vice president of Crystal Cruises was there to heckle me on behalf of the International Council of Cruise Lines. And he stood up and he says, not only are cruise ships virtually clean because we depend on the pristine oceans for our livelihood, but Crystal Cruises is among the best. 3 weeks later, it came out that Crystal Cruises had discharged, contrary to its written pledge, discharged 36,000 gallons of untreated sewage and other waste in the sanctuary. When they were challenged about it, this guy stood up to the media in the International Council of Cruise Lines, which is now CLIA, stood up in the media and they said, we don't know what people are all excited about. We didn't break the law, we only broke our word. The people of Monterey have now barred Crystal Cruises from stopping there for 15 years. The ship is barred in perpetuity, and it may not be a surprise that ship has now been renamed and given to a different company because they don't want to have it. Okay. Washington State, they have a memorandum of understanding. First of all, in Washington State, in Seattle, when they built a new cruise terminal, the cruise industry, the cruise line said, well, we'll agree to use low sulfur fuel when we're in port. They built the port, the cruise ships came in, they then said, well, we can't use low sulfur fuel, it's not possible in our engines, and they refused to use it. They have a memorandum of understanding with the industry, which has no discharge within 4 miles of the coast, no sewage sludge within 12 miles. But in 2006, the Celebrity Mercury was caught violating 10 times this memorandum of understanding. They responded, they said, well, we didn't do it. Then they looked at the map and they said, okay, we did it. But 3 of the violations were in Canada, so they don't count. Only the ones in Washington. The Norwegian Sun in 2003 was caught discharging 16,000 gallons of raw sewage in Washington, again violating the MOU. And they didn't deny they did it. They said, but the state doesn't have jurisdiction to do anything about it. Now, this is a map from the state of Washington. The blue lines with arrows are the discharges. Okay? And the little, you can see the lines, the discharges going, you can see the kind of salmon-colored lines. Those are shellfish beds. So they're going parallel to the shellfish beds, either side, discharging their sewage. Okay? This is their data, not mine. Okay? In Alaska, they have a cruise ship initiative. As already mentioned, they tested the marine sanitation devices. 79 out of 80 of the samples were out of compliance. The governor said that the results were disgusting and disgraceful. This led to discharge standards. They now certify advanced wastewater treatment systems that can discharge in Alaska waters. And in 2006, they had a ballot initiative where they now have onboard observers monitoring the pollution what's being offloaded from cruise ships. They have clear discharge standards. Even with that, in 2008, there were 60% of the ships that were certified had violations, a total of 45 violations. And last year, in 2009, there were 66 violations. 72% of the ships that were certified violated Alaska water quality standards at least once. The problem with the new systems, they have difficulty with ammonia, with zinc, with copper, with biological oxygen demand, with pH, and with fecal coliform. And if you see, I misspelled that. In California, they have a whole series of legislation. They don't allow wastewater to be discharged, sludge, oily bilge, no incinerator use in state waters, and low sulfur fuel within 24 miles of coast. They also have reduced speed limits as ships enter ports to reduce the amount of pollution, and they require, or they offer in some ports, cold ironing. That means they use shoreside power. Okay? Now, as you see, and I think it was on the handout, Joe Stamidian, who's a state senator, said, trust is not an effective environmental policy. Now, I have a couple of just images. This map is, again, it's produced by the industry. This is 4 weeks of discharges. And what they did is they did a study, International Council of Cruise Lines, and they recorded from ship logs every discharge. And so each blue dot is a discharge. And again, this is just over 4 weeks. And you can see the concentration of not just where they travel, but also as they leave ports and when they go back to ports. Here's the same map, but just in Florida. And you've got arrows there. And you can see as they enter into port in Florida, you see they're discharging to clean out their tanks. And as soon as they leave, they're cleaning out their tanks. Okay, now it may be 3 miles offshore, but sea currents don't know 3 miles. And that's why I think when Nisha was presenting why there's a concern. And as a closing slide, this is a picture from Victoria, British Columbia, the Mercury sitting in dock. And that's probably a perfect lead-in for the next presenter.